Blog Talk Radio.
Well, here we go. Everybody talks about the Browns, the Cavaliers, the Guardians, and the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, but that's on the back burner right now. This is the show that sweeps Cleveland Tuesday nights and has been sweeping Cleveland for quite a few weeks and years, and I'm so blessed to produce it. It is the American Sports History Podcast, hosted by a brother, a mentor, and a friend of me, Peter Ray, out there in Cleveland, Ohio. Yours truly 2,500 miles to the west of him in Los Angeles, where it's kind of been looking like Buffalo and Seattle weather of late. But that's a story for the meteorologist, 347-205-9631. If you happen to miss it, I realize 30 minutes goes by quick. Batten down the hatches. Catch it on blogtalkradio.com/Mancini Sports, podcast platforms, wherever you subscribe to podcasts, powered now by Mancini Media. So without further ado, more of him, less of me. Let me lay the red carpet down, put the podium in its place, hand off the mic. Peter the Threes, how are you? How can people get a hold of you? And you're bringing this guest back. He comes in every month, and we're just so blessed. And prayers to him coming off that mountain in Maine. He got the help by the Rangers, and man, oh man, are we excited to have him. Take it away. I'll man the boards, my friends.
Yeah. Hi, Mark. I'm doing well. I have a YouTube channel. It's my name, Peter J. REA. My YouTube, my email address is there. I'm on Facebook. You can send me a friend request. I'd be happy to message people there. You're absolutely right. Tonight's guest is the author of 4 tremendous sports books. Bench Bosses, the NHL's Coaching Elite 2015. The Art of the Dealers, the NHL's Greatest General Managers 2017. Lords of the Gridiron, College Football's Greatest Coaches 2019. And the book that we talk about every 4 weeks, Lords of the Gridiron 2, Pro Football's Greatest Coaches 2022. In 2026, he's got 2 new books coming out, Baseball's Greatest Managers and the NBA's Greatest Coaches. Welcome to the show again, the incomparable Matthew DiBiase.
Peter, Mark, it's so great to be back, man. I mean, boy, 4 weeks flies just so fast, and it's going to be a real fun tonight, and a real fun night tonight, and I can't wait. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. More wonderful NFL history. Starting off with Greasy Neal, who's ranked 26th all-time on your list of greatest NFL coaches, who coached the Philadelphia Eagles from 1941 to 1950 and won 2 NFL championships in 1948 and 1949. What can you say about Greasy Neal?
You know, Peter, before the arrival of Andy Reid, Greasy Neal was the greatest head coach in Philadelphia Eagles history. I mean, he won, like you said before, he won 2 NFL titles, appeared in 3 consecutive NFL championship games from 1947 to 1949. According to my calculations, he was the second greatest NFL head coach of the 1940s after George Halas. And he was a very innovative coach in terms of both offense and defense. What he did was he took the rudiments of George Halas's T formation that gained traction in the 1940s, and what he did was he expanded its possibilities, especially in terms of outside running, and also he revolutionized NFL defenses with his creation of what they called the Eagle defense. Basically, before Neal came up with his 5-2-4 defense, it was basically defenses were more like 6-2-3 defenses or 5-3-3 defenses, only 3 deep backs and all that. But what Greasy Neal did was he eliminated one of the linebackers, only going with a 5-man line, 2 outside linebackers, but to combat the forward passing, which was beginning to increase during the 1940s thanks to the T formation, he added 1 extra defensive back. And during the 1940s and up to the mid-1950s, that was like the dominant defensive set until finally it was supplanted by the 4-3-4 defense that was developed, during the early 1950s and finally came to fore by the mid-1950s. It was very innovative, and it was also emulated by college football too. So he was a very innovative coach. And the Eagles, during the late 1940s, were one of the dominant teams in the NFL during that era. I mean, from 47 to 49, they had the greatest combined regular season record in the entire NFL. And they set records, postseason records, that I don't think they'll ever be broken. I mean, They were the only NFL team to ever win back-to-back NFL championship games via shutout. In 48 and 49, they shut out the Chicago Cardinals in 1948 and also the Los Angeles Rams in 1949. And I don't think it's never been equaled, and it'll never be surpassed, especially in the Super Bowl era, because I don't know if people realize this, but in every Super Bowl game that's ever played, there has never, ever been a shutout in Super Bowl history. So the idea of, back-to-back shutouts or 3 consecutive shutouts by a team, I don't think what Neil did will ever be equaled or let alone surpassed. So that's one of the great my opinion, one of the great unbreakable records in NFL history, and it's all credit to Greasy Neal. Now, that was not his Christian name. He was actually born Alfred Earl Neal in 1891 in Parkersburg, West Virginia. Now, how he got the nickname Greasy, it's kind of like a story out of childhood. I mean, he lived in, Parkersburg was like, it was rough and tumble country out there. It was very isolated. And he had this childhood friend, and they would tease each other. Greasy would call this other kid Dirty, and so the other kid called Greasy Neal Greasy, and it just stuck for the rest of his life. And what's interesting about Greasy Neal was that it wasn't just football wasn't only his life. He was actually a top-notch baseball player, and he actually played Major League Baseball. And here's an interesting trivia question. He is the only person ever to play for a World Series winner and also coach for an NFL champion, because he was an outfielder for the Cincinnati Reds, and he actually played for that 1919 Cincinnati Reds team that actually won the infamous World Series that was tainted by the Black Sox scandal. He was there as a starter in the outfield there. And he had a semi-substantial major league career. And then, but he also, in off seasons, he was also coaching multiple sports. He could coach baseball, he could coach football. And he was coaching like local high school football. And then by the 1920s, he was coaching in college there. And he was coaching like at West Virginia Wesleyan and West Virginia University. And he also made history. He coached the Washington Jefferson Presidents to an undefeated season in 1921, and they got to play in the 1922 Rose Bowl. It's the only Rose Bowl game that actually ended in a tie, and not just an ordinary tie. It was a scoreless tie. When they tied one of the greatest teams of the early 1920s, the California Golden Bears, the Wonder Team, they fought them to an absolute standstill, and one of the reasons why, because there was a freak rainstorm in Pasadena, and it converted the Rose Bowl, the playing field at the Rose Bowl, into a mud bath, and it utterly negated University of California's speed and shiftiness, which they needed to win. So it was a trench warfare, which was to the president's liking, and they just held California to a scoreless tie. It was like a symbolic victory, even though it was a tied score. The fact that you held this highly, a stronger team to a scoreless tie was like a moral victory, as it were. And he just kind of bounced around NCAA, coaching here and there. He was coaching in the Ivy League, I think it was like Yale University in the late 1930s, and then finally, 1941, he was hired to become the head coach of the Philadelphia Eagles. I mean, before his arrival, the Eagles been in existence for like 1933, and they were lousy. I mean, they just couldn't do anything. I mean, they may have been called the Eagles, but they certainly weren't flying, man. They were like a team with 2 broken wings. They were pathetic. And what Greasy Neal did when he took over the reins is that he just tore everything apart, and he just started from absolute scratch. Using the NFL draft, every year he starts getting these draft choices. He gets Steve Van Buren, Bucko Kilroy, Tommy Thompson, Pete Pihos, all these guys. He starts trading for people. He gets Alex Wojciechowicz, Norm Wildman Willie, and he creates year by year. The Eagles get stronger and stronger and stronger, and then by 1946 they're winners, and they start they're competitive. And then 1947 he puts it all together, and for 3 straight years they win 3 straight Eastern Division titles and they play in the NFL championship game. And while he's getting the players, he's also altering their tactics. In the 30s, when he was coaching in college, he was using the single wing, which is kind of like a shotgun formation like we recognize now, but with a lot of running. A lot of running. But when he watched the 1940 NFL championship game where the Chicago Bears beat the Washington Redskins 73-0 using George Halas's T formation, he saw the future right then and there. And what he did was he actually got game films of the entire game for a mere $64. He got films of the entire game, and he just spent weeks studying those films over and over, charting plays, doing diagrams, and he was seeing what the T formation could do and what it couldn't do. And what he did was he did little minute alterations to the T formation, because Halas's formation was mostly emphasized inside running, basically between the tackles. What Greasy Neal wanted was to give Halas's T formation an outside running advantage. And so he did, he altered some blocking schemes there, did a little tinkering here, a little tinkering there. And then when he got Steve Van Buren made the difference, because he was the big gun on that Eagles team. I mean, people don't remember him now, but before the advent of Jim Brown, Steve Van Buren was like the greatest NFL runner of the late 1940s and early 1950s. His career was very brief. He suffered a severe leg injury that really impaired his career during, was it 1950 or 1951, from which he never recovered. But he was still good enough to make it to the NFL Hall of Fame. And Steve Van Buren was the second man in NFL history to rush for over 1,000 yards in a single season. And this is when seasons were only 12 games long. So that was an incredible achievement when he did that. And he accounted for like 1/4 of the Eagles' entire offense. I mean, he was the big gun. I mean, he was a battering ram. I mean, he scored the game, the sole touchdown in the 1948 NFL championship game, which was played in a horrible blizzard. I mean, the whole field was literally inundated with snow. And so from 47 to 49, I mean, the Eagles were just absolutely dominant. And then they won again in 1949, beating the Los Angeles Rams at Los Angeles, again in a freak rainstorm that turned the L.A. Memorial Coliseum into a quagmire. They beat the Rams 14-0, and Steve Van Buren set a postseason record, which I think it finally got broken, but he rushed for like 196 yards on that day in the mud. I mean, it was a stupendous performance. But in 1950, they took on the Cleveland Browns. It was one of the famous matchups. It was the very first game in the 1950 season. So you had the NFL champion Eagles taking on the AAFC champion Cleveland Browns in the very first game of the season. It was a test to see who was really the superior league, the Browns or the Eagles. And what happened is that there was a fatal flaw in Greasy Neal's defense there, that 5-2-4. The fact is there was no middle linebacker. All you had was a defensive guard, and what Paul Brown did was he spaced out his guards, thus isolating the middle guard, and then he was using double teams and trap blocking on that middle guard. And when Marion Motley or any other running back got through, there was no middle linebacker to pick it up, so they were instantly in the backfield, and the Browns were just able to grind down the Eagles 35-10. So that was kind of like the beginning of the end for Greasy Neal. And also, there was new Eagles ownership that took over from the previous owner. I think his name was Thompson or something or another. I forget his name. And these new owners it was like a case of too many cooks. It was like a committee of guys, and they just kept interfering, and Greasy Neal just couldn't stand it. I mean, he had a fight with one of them in the locker room after one game. The Eagles finished at 6-6, and then finally Greasy Neal, he just gave it up. He never returned to NFL coaching again. But until, like I said, before the arrival of Andy Reid, he was the greatest Philadelphia Eagles head coach of all time.
Yeah, I love that you're given. I don't think I'd ever heard of Greasy Neal. NFL in the 40s is just wonderful to learn about because I know very little. Now, from your chapter, you wrote, despite his great achievements, Greasy Neal remains lost in the folds of the annals of NFL history. Hey, that's really cool about him playing on the 1919 Cincinnati Reds, of course, who were the team that won when the Black Sox threw the series. And here, that's super cool. Interesting. And then another good quote. He said, Greasy Neal had inherited the Augean stables, and he needed a river of talent to clean away the detritus. Great reference to ancient mythology, Greek mythology, really good. And I love the story about how he got a copy of the NFL title game from 1940, 73-0 victory for the for the Bears against the Redskins and watched that for months. And so that was really, and you wrote about how he really got into scouting. He said his scouts kept records of every single college player in the nation.
Yeah.
There's a good quote. One of his players, Alex Wojciechowicz, said there wasn't, there wasn't a better man around than Greasy Neal. On the football field, he was tough as hell, stern. He was almighty God out there, but off the field, he was one of us. He'd gamble with us, beer up with us, go to the racetrack with us, play golf, anything we'd do to be a part of it. So this is tremendous that we're halfway through the show. Let's move on to Marty Schottenheimer, who coached the Cleveland Browns, Kansas City Chiefs, Washington Redskins, and San Diego Chargers from 1984 to 2006. And the one thing I love about Schottenheimer, of course, he's probably my favorite Cleveland Browns coach in my lifetime, and maybe the third best Browns coach of all time after Paul Brown and Glenn Collier. Anyway, before the 1986 AFC title game, in the video, if you watch the highlights, before the game, he's talking to the players, and he says, "There's a gleam, men. There's a gleam. Let's get the gleam." He's talking about the gleam of the Super Bowl trophy.
Yeah.
So what can you say about Marty Schottenheimer?
Oh, it's one of the great sad stories of the NFL. I mean, a truly great and and magnificent coach, but never the luck. I mean, I start off my chapter with him. There's this scene in the very first Ocean's 11 movie, the one done by Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin and the Rat Pack. It's one of my favorite scenes, more heartfelt scenes in the movie. One of the Ocean's 11, played by the actor Richard Conte, he's the electronics expert. And as they're doing the robbery, they pull off the robbery. He fills up his sack with money from one of the casinos, and he's making his way to the rendezvous point where they're going to drop off the money. And right then and there, in front of Sinatra and Lawford and them, he uncorks a fatal heart attack, and his last words is, "Never the luck, never the luck." And that is the story of Marty Schottenheimer and NFL postseason competition, because according to my calculations, he is the greatest heartbreak coach in NFL history. Now, for those of you listening, I invented this term called a heartbreak coach. That's a coach who can lead his team to the playoffs at least 5 times without ever reaching the championship finals. And in the NFL, Marty Schottenheimer had 12 playoff appearances, but never, ever made it to the Super Bowl. No other NFL coach has ever had a string of futility like that. Marty Schottenheimer is the greatest heartbreak coach of all time in NFL history. And it's sad because his players just absolutely loved him. I mean, he is the only Super Bowl era coach with over 200 wins who never led a team to the Super Bowl. And his regular season record was just absolutely stupendous. In fact, when he was coaching the Chargers, his record was it 2006 where they won 14 games. That's still the franchise record in Chargers history. 14 wins, still hasn't been surpassed. I mean, he managed to revive the Cleveland Browns. He came so heartbreakingly close to getting them to the Super Bowl twice, only to be done in by 2 incredible two events, the drive and then the fumble. Oh, man, it's unbelievable. I mean, same with the Chiefs. He helped revive them, and they came so close to returning the Super Bowl, but they didn't make it, and they had to wait till Andy Reid to finally they returned to Super Bowl competition. He came from Western Pennsylvania, Cannonsburg, which is, of course, that seedbed of so many great football players. And he always attended schools in the greater Pittsburgh area. And he learned, during his playing career, he learned some lessons that he applied as a coach. Like, if he did poorly, he wouldn't dwell on a thing. If he dwelled on his mistakes, he did so at midnight, and then after midnight, he would just switch it off and just drop it and move on. In other words, he would not let past setbacks bother him or anything like that. He would meditate on that. In other words, one down at a time, one play at a time. In other words, don't dwell on the past. Focus on doing better on the next play and all that. Forget about what the mistake you made. Focus on what you're doing now and what you're going to do in the future and all that. And that's something he applied to his players as a coach. and he played in the AFL. He played for the Buffalo Bills. A marginal player. He's not a starter. He was more like a substitute and backup. Played on special teams and all of that. And then finally, his playing career ended. It was about 1971, and he was out of football for a time. He tried to work in real estate, but he wasn't really good at it. And then he returned. He was coaching in the World Football League. He was like a linebackers coach for like the Portland Storm. But then when the league folded again, he was out of business. But he managed to hook up with the New York Giants, and he was doing assistant coaching work under Bill Arnsparger for the Giants. And then he was working with the Lions there. I mean, he was closely moving up the ladder, and then he finally became an assistant coach under Stan Rutigliano with the Cleveland Browns in the early 80s. When Rutigliano just couldn't advance the Browns in the playoffs, Rutigliano got fired, and Schottenheimer was named as the interim coach. But Schottenheimer took a gamble. When Art Modell named him the interim coach, Schottenheimer he gambled. He basically told Modell, I don't want to be an interim coach. You want me to accept this position. I want you to make me the head coach. Either take it or leave it. And, I mean, that was a risk. I mean, Modell could have balked at that. But you know something? Modell took a chance and decided, okay, no, you're not the interim. You're going to be my man, okay, and I'm going with you. And it was a great decision because he played out the string in his very first year. And then when he took over, he just he basically remolded the team. He emphasized an extremely strong ground game. He had Bernie Kosar at quarterback, and he had Kevin Mack at fullback, and he decided to make Ernest Bider the starting running back. He was like the main point of the Cleveland Browns offense. They were the spearheads for Marty Ball, and basically what Marty Ball was ground game. It's like a battering ram. You're just going to keep pounding them. If you couldn't get 10 yards at 2 carries in the first 2 downs, then you would throw on third down to get first down. But if you were getting short yards, you would just keep running. Nothing fancy. It was just basically battering ram football. And just, maintain ball possession, try to minimize your mistakes, and just keep it one play at a time. I mean, when I interviewed Tim Grunard, who played with the Chiefs, who later played with Schottenheimer, the Chiefs, and they used the same systems at Kansas City, he basically told me, and I quote, he said, Marty Ball is a tough, hard-nosed running game. Run the football to set up the play-action pass and try to make some plays. Run the ball to take the spirit out of the opposing team, and then take those shots on the play-action when they try to do too much. Basically, Schottenheimer's teams would basically run like 30 to 40 times a game, which in the 80s was sort of normal. Today, I mean, now we're going back to the running game. You're seeing a return to like Schottenheimer-type tactics and all of that, but it was that was the standard. And he said, at time, at first, the game began, you might get 2 or 3 yards, but he said by third and fourth quarters, you're getting like 5 to 8 yard carries and all of that. And so they got back in the playoff competition, and then they had those 2 matchups with the Denver Broncos, and again, they had leads. That first time they had a lead, and then they lost it when John Elway led them on that 98-yard drive, and that was just a killer. And then in that second, second AFC Conference Championship game, they were going to tie the score. That Biner got that ball. He was rushing towards the end zone. He gets stripped of the football just shy of the goal line, and they fall just short. I mean, it was just so heartbreaking. And then finally, Art Modell lost patience, and he fired Schottenheimer, and the Kansas City Chiefs picked him up, and then he was able to revive the Chiefs. I mean, he draft choice by draft choice. He's able to get some good players, Christian Okoye, Steve DeBerg, Ron Jaworski, and then finally they get Joe Montana and Marcus Allen, and they really start making a play. I mean, they become competitive, and they come so close to reaching the Super Bowl, but again, they just couldn't get the luck there. I mean, either there was injuries or a fluke play, and it was really heartbreaking, for Schottenheimer. And then the Chiefs lost patience, and then basically Marty was kind of drifting around. He did that one season with the Chiefs. That's when Dan Snyder was owning them. He only lasted one season. Then he went with San Diego. He got them revived because he had Drew Brees and LaDainian Tomlinson. But the problem was the Chargers had a general manager who wanted his own guy in there. and they never got and Schottenheimer and the guy never got along, and finally Schottenheimer came out on the losing end, and after '06 he never coached in the NFL again. I mean, he deserves to be in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. I mean, he passed away a few years ago. I think he had sort of like dementia or something like that. It's kind of a shame. Hopefully one day, like Blanton Collier, he will get the induction that he truly deserves.
Yeah, as you mentioned, his heartbreak coach, winning 13 games twice with the Chiefs. You think if you win that many, back then it was 13-3, and you don't make it to the Super Bowl. That's brutal. Now, and you have a great story about when he was a player playing for the Bills, and he was a defensive player and went in to tackle Joe Namath, who was scrambling, and he aimed low and missed. Namath got away, and you wrote how he lost focus. And he kept obsessing over the missed tackle of Joe Namath and kept making mistakes on defense. So he learned about that. You got to let stuff go. I thought that was a great reference to Joe Namath, of course, who's such a cool player. Now, you have a great quote by Tim Grunard. Marty Schottenheimer was like another father to me. I loved him and respected him so much. When you first meet Marty, the first thing you realize is how smart he is. He's an English major. And he's very well spoken and a great orator. I was very impressed. Usually you have tough, hard-nosed football players that turn into coaches, and you think they're going to be tough and brash, but Marty was not. You could tell that Marty was a different kind of guy when it came to coaching and being a guy who played in the NFL. And as you mentioned, with the drive, the fumble, all these, my favorite era in Cleveland Browns history, Bernie Kosar, Kevin Mack, Ernest Binder, and so forth. So tremendous. I really enjoyed reading the chapter about Marty Schottenheimer. There was NFL Films. They did a thing on him. I remember he was interviewed, and he said, at one point he said we were in his life. He was married, and maybe I don't know if he had young children, and they were bad shape financially. And he says we were this close to the bottom, and then he got a break. He got a job. So, and you can tell he ran with it and did have a tremendous career. So it was such a shame that Art Modell that he didn't stay in Cleveland. Because I felt he's the greatest coach that we've ever had, at least in my lifetime since I've been following the Browns since 1972. Any more thoughts on Marty Schottenheimer?
I often wonder if Cleveland had been able to get into the Super Bowl, if that could have altered the equation, if the original Browns had just been able to stay in Cleveland. You kind of wonder about that, if that could have altered, just that economic or emotional equation there. But I think it was those long years of fertility, and in fact, it was just Modell decided to pull the plug. I mean, that's kind of a shame when the original Browns left Cleveland. It's just never been the same, with these new Browns. It's just not the same. I don't know. That's the way I feel about it. But I think, Marty Schottenheimer deserves induction, absolutely, positively, and hopefully, it's a pity it's going to be a posthumous induction, but I hope it does happen and he gets the recognition that he truly and richly deserves.
Our guest has been Mr. Matthew DiBiase, and we've been talking again about his book, Lords of the Gridiron 2, Pro Football's Greatest Coaches, which came out in 2022. We've had some nice comments. Albert from Poway, California, I believe. Love your show, Peter. Keep up the great work. Thanks so much, Albert. And Joey from Bucks County, Pennsylvania. Nice facts from Matthew DiBiase. Area code's 412-206-330-858-732. Let's see. We have. Do you have any more thoughts on Greasy Neal or Marty Schottenheimer, Matthew?
Just go out and you want to just buy my book, Lords of the Gridiron 2. It's on sale at 30% off and will remain on sale until after the next Super Bowl is played. If you want a Christmas book for Christmas, go out and get it. It's up on Amazon. Lords of the Gridiron 2, Pro Football's Greatest Coaches by Matthew DiBiase. Go out and get it.
I love this. Yeah, you had these two chapters. One, a guy who's very obscure. And and it's good to learn. That's what I want to learn. This Greasy Neal, Marty Schottenheimer, I remember well in Cleveland, who really gave us some good times. And and he played for. He had some cool players when he left Cleveland, like LaDainian Tomlinson, Christian Okoye, and Joe Montana, and so forth. Very good. Let's see. We're going to have Matthew DiBiase back in 4 weeks from tonight. We'll talk about Pete Carroll. coached the Jets, Patriots, and Seahawks in the 90s and 10s and up to the present. And Tom Coughlin coached the Jaguars and the Giants from 1995 to 2015. Do you have any final thoughts tonight for our audience, Matthew?
I just want to say thank you, Peter, and thank you to Mark, and just thank you to all the listeners out there. I love you all. And also catch my podcast tonight, The Package Tourist, where I'll be interviewing a magnificent NFL football author, Tom Daniluk, about his book, the 1970s Super 70s, which is a great read. It was a great source book for my fourth book, Lords of the Gridiron 2. So listen to my podcast, The Package Tourist, tonight.
Oh, very good. Wonderful. It's just wonderful having you on again, NFL history. And so thanks again for another tremendous show. Matthew DiBiase.
Thank you, Peter. God bless you.
God bless you. Next week, we're going to have the starting center fielder and leadoff hitter for the coolest MLB team of all time, the Oakland A's from the early 1970s, Mr. Bill North, for the 30th time. Dear listener, may the road rise to meet you. May the wind be at your back. May the sun shine warm upon your face and rains fall soft upon your fields. And until we meet again, may God hold you in the palm of his hand. Good night, everybody. Thanks again so much, Mr. Matthew DiBiase.
Good night, Peter. Thanks. Bye.
Good night. Thank you.